is it better to rent or buy a home with these market conditions and these interest rates and the things that we have going on over here? Is it better right now to rent or buy a home? I seen this pop up on my algorithm, and so I wanted to share this with you guys and react to it in real time. Make sure you hit a like for the algorithm. Make sure you tap into the Patreon. Link is in the description as well as pinned to the top of the chat. I love you guys. I appreciate you. Let's get to it, y'all.
Is it better to buy or rent a home? Buying has almost always been favored over renting.
And make sure y'all get the likes up too. I know y'all be forgetting because y'all just want to get in here and interact and chat lives matters. But make sure y'all get the likes up too.
When it comes to housing, for generations, the prevailing wisdom has been that renting is wasting money. But what about now, with a tough real estate market characterized by elevated listing prices and interest rates? David Leonhardt has long covered this issue for the New York Times. He's also the author of the book on the economy called Ours Was the Shining Future, the story of the American dream. David Leonhardt, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So considering this daunting real estate market, limited inventory, interest rates for a 30-year fixed somewhere between 6.5% and 7%, and a median U.S. home price of $420,000, what?
Man, where your stash at, bro? Where your stash at, bro? Can't be up there looking like a veggie tail.
And a median U.S. home price of $420,000. What is a prospective home buyer to do? Is renting these days actually a better option?
For most people, it is a better option. That is if you don't already own. I'm not saying that most people should sell their homes if they own. If you own, you probably have a pretty good mortgage rate. But for people who don't yet own a home and are trying to make a decision, the economics of renting have not looked this good in a long time. And I think I understand why people have so long been down on renting. There's even been some shame associated with renting. And I think it's important to say, look, for most people right now who are trying to figure out whether to buy or rent, renting is the smarter option financially. You'll save money. And there's a reason there's so much of a sense that Americans should never rent, which is.
You know, one of the things that it is, I think that he made a couple of really good points. But let me add in my 2 cents. People they shame you for renting. Even though they don't know that most people that are super successful, they own property, but they still have a place that they rent out. I'll give you an example. New York has 370,000 millionaires, if I'm not mistaken. Let me make sure I double check that. How many? According to Investopedia, as of April 19th, 2023, New York City has the most millionaires, is the world's wealthiest city with about 340,000 millionaires as of April 19th. 2023. So New York City is a hub that basically has the most millionaires, even though they also have the biggest population, because I just looked at a video from Jordan Cash where he says that 2.7 million people in New York are basically homeless. But then at the same time, New York has the most millionaires. Well, guess what? New York is a renter's city. New York is a renter's city. Most people, including most of the millionaires in New York, they do not own the property that they are spending the majority of their time in. Now, whether or not they write it off as a business expense and there's ways that you can do that and all of that, I'm not going to get into that on this because I'm not a financial advisor. We're going to have to tap into the Patreon in order to get that masterclass. And we do plan on doing another masterclass on that this year. But they have the most millionaires, but most of them are renting the properties that they spend the majority of their time in. It's just a fact. Now, the question then becomes, is it better to rent or buy? But it depends on your lifestyle. It depends on where you at. It depends on the property taxes. It depends on the terms of the loan that you get. The problem with most people is not determining whether or not they should buy or they should rent. Most people can't afford a home. Read that super chat shortly. Thank y'all. Most people can afford a home. Most people can't afford the home that they want. That's the problem. Most people cannot afford the home that they want. Here's the dynamics, and here's how you should make the decision. First, you have to evaluate what your long-term goals are. If you looked at the live stream from last night, I gave y'all a couple of hits. I was talking about relationships, but I was also referring to finances in order to justify my argument. And I was saying that, listen, the decisions that you make today is going to determine whether or not you're going to be successful tomorrow. It's all in reverse. And so a lot of times we'll go for the shiny object and you'll buy that car or you'll finance a home for 30 years because you want the best available and you basing it based off of the payment that you're going to make instead of basing it off of what you want your economic status to be long term, what you want your net worth to be. So I'll give you two different scenarios of whether or not you should rent or you should buy. In some instances, some people need a roommate, or some people would just want to stack up, spend a majority of their time investing. They're not in a real good situation. They don't even know where they're going to be living at long term. They speculating. And so in that instance, you may want to go with the option, the cheapest available option, so you can stack the majority of your money because your investments or what you're investing in, sometimes you even investing in yourself. You may be a student. You may be going back to school. You may be spending an ordinary amount of time over in this particular area, whatever, right? Property taxes, HOA fees, all of that stuff factors into it. But the first thing that you should try to do is minimize the amount of money that you have to spend on housing. But people want to justify their purchases, so a lot of times they overspend on things that they shouldn't have. Conversely, when you decide that you want to buy a house, are you purchasing too much house? Because everybody is going to say, oh my God, I can't afford the bills. But chances are you bought more house than you actually needed or you're using. And so housing is supposed to be a vehicle, not just for you to live a lifestyle. It's supposed to be an idea for you to be able to make sure you got shelter over your head so you can really live life and have experiences, right? So most people that get into purchasing a house, they get a 30-year mortgage by default. Instead of looking at the type of house and where you want to live and then saying, can I afford this? Do I need to lower my lifestyle? Right? So you can pay off that house much faster, pay less in interest over into the finance company or the bank, and finance it for 10 or 15 years. My rule of thumb, and I know this is not popular because it doesn't make the banks more money and interest. My rule of thumb is you should only be financing your house at a maximum of 15 years, preferably 10. Then you're going to have the people that come back and they're going to say, well, what if I finance it for 30 and I pay it off in 15? Very few people actually do that. Most people get caught up in their credit cards in the same way. Well, I'm only going to get it in order to get the perks. Well, why are consumer debt exploding more and bigger than it's ever been? Because you were brought in to think that that's what you were going to do. That's how you convinced yourself to get it. But in reality, you spent money on something that you couldn't afford, and having that credit card gave you this confidence, and it made things available to you that you wouldn't normally do in a situation where you had to pay cash. That's why casinos give you chips instead of giving you cash to bet. They give you chips because it's easier to use. It's less valuable in your mind when you start to use them and throw them out on the table. If you was to have cash and doing it, you will be using it a completely different way. And it's the same psychological method that they use when it comes to financing and using credit cards, and also when it comes to mortgages. So when you're having this conversation with yourself and you're saying, well, should I rent or should I buy? I think that there's pros and cons to both, but it depends on the lifestyle and what your long-term goals are.
We have this huge industry, the real estate industry, that makes a lot more money from selling homes than renting them. And it helps to get out this message that people should buy rather than rent, when in fact, many people should rent.
On the other hand, David, rents are sky high right now. As of November, the national median for a one-bedroom apartment was roughly $1,500 a month. In New York City, it was $4,300 a month. So isn't that throwing away money in the sense that you're not building equity when you're paying that much money?
It's important to remember all the ways that you also throw money away by buying. There is a very large fee, often in the tens of thousands of dollars, that goes to a real estate agent. That's throwing money away.
A lot of people don't truly calculate the true cost of buying a home. They only look at the equity. Listen, unless you're going to live in that home for at least 10 to 15 years, in most instances, you don't even really get the true value out of the home unless you're hoping that it appreciate. And sometimes it doesn't, especially depending on the area that you buy in. You pay all of these fees. You pay the property taxes. You pay the fees over into the real estate agents when you sell it. You pay fees to refinance it. You pay fees when it comes to homeowners insurance. You pay fees and maintenance. You pay all of these different things. I just got a call the other day from one of my properties, and they wanted to do a mold testing because they said that it had been moisture over in a specific area, and they wanted to make sure that there wasn't any toxic mold in there. Well, how much did that cost me? $900. Then I got a phone call and saying, well, it's not toxic mold, but we want to make sure that we remove some stuff and insulate it and take care of this and all of this other type of stuff with the company. Then they said, I said, okay, well, how much is that going to cost me? Somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. So either I'm going to have to come out of that out of pocket, or hopefully I can tap into the homeowner's insurance in order to continue to pay for it. But that is an unexpected fee as a owner of a property that I'm renting over into people that I have to take care of as a landlord. They don't tell you that, right? Last year, it was another property that I had where they called me in the summertime and they said, hey, we need to refresh the Freon or whatever, so on and so forth, inside of the cold air, right? In order to make sure that the air is cold and everything is working fine. Called them over there. Guy said, hey, Anton, next year you're going to have to replace the system altogether because whatever it is that they selling as far as the Freon, that's pretty much being phased out. You're going to have to get a whole new system. Okay, cool. Well, you know what? Let me check the furnace too. Check the furnace. Anton, if you don't go ahead and replace the furnace, man, these are people that I trust. These are not people that's finessing me, and I get multiple different estimates and second opinions. Anton, you need to replace the furnace and the central air system. How much is that going to cost me? Somewhere between $7,000 and $8,000. Okay, go ahead and knock that out, right? And your real estate strategy are 3-tiered. That's the first video that I'm going to release to y'all on the Patreon. And I'm going to break down the 3 ways that people look at real estate investing in order to make a lot of money from it. And I'm going to go into it and I'm going to break it down all the way down to a science for y'all from a C student's perspective. My point is, if I'm looking at those particular properties, because I got a different real estate strategy than everybody else, if I'm looking at those properties just based off of cash flowing, then those years, I may not necessarily be making a lot of money, right? I may not necessarily be making any money. I might be in a negative for those properties. Do you make enough money to be able to cover that? Because most people just look at what's the difference between a rent and what's the difference between how much money did they pay in rent, but you're not really understanding that you're going to have to replace a roof, right? It's going to be an accident in there. You may have turnover in the properties that you have. You may not necessarily be able to raise the rent. It's a lot of factors that go into it. But my point is that these strategies that come along with, or how you calculate what real estate is really worth to you, as far as whether you get an equity or not, it doesn't necessarily work in your favor 100% of the time. It doesn't necessarily work in your favor 100% of the time. So don't just let somebody just give you a cookie cutter answer and saying, hey, it's better to buy than it is to rent. Most people can't even understand the amount of money that it takes in order to purchase in the first place. You want to put down 3.5%. Okay, now you got to pay private mortgage insurance. It's a lot of factors that go into it.
You're paying the bank huge amounts of interest, and the mortgage interest deduction reduces that interest, but it doesn't eliminate it. That's throwing away money. It's giving it to a bank. You have to do repairs when you own a home, often repairs that don't really add to the value of the house. Like if your roof is leaky and you have to fix it, you have no choice but to do that. That's not a renovated kitchen. It's just throwing money away to keep you where you are. And then finally, there's the opportunity cost. If you didn't buy a home, if you didn't use all that money for a down payment, you could have invested it in the stock market. You could have invested it in other ways.
That's true.
And so it's true that renting involves throwing money away, but so does buying.
Well, why are home prices so high right now? Because it strikes me that with high interest rates, that would or should suggest that demand would be lower and that sellers would then have to cut the price of the home in order to drive up demand, but that's not happening.
No, it's not. And Jeff, the way you describe it is exactly the way a market should work. It's just the housing market is a bizarre market in which psychology plays a really big role. And so what a lot of people do is they say, I'm not willing to accept less than a certain price for their home. Maybe they think about the price they bought it for and they add on the cost of all the repairs and renovations they've done. Or maybe it's a round number. But we've all done this ourselves, or we've known family members who've done it. They've said, well, I'm just not willing to accept less than $350,000. Or less than $850,000 or whatever for their house. And so what they do when they don't find the demand for housing that they want, when they don't get the offers that they want, they pull their house off the market and they think, I'll put it back on later. And so housing ends up having this really artificial quality in which prices don't fall to meet reduced demand. And that's where we are right now. So if you're a would-be home buyer right now, you kind of have the worst of all worlds. Interest rates have gone way up, but prices haven't fallen. And so you really have to pay a huge amount of money to buy a home. And that's exactly why, for most people, again, not forever, but in the short or medium term, renting makes a lot of sense for a lot of people in the Northeast, on the West Coast, in major markets like Atlanta and Dallas and places like that.
So you have to be very, 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 very careful. And I think that every situation is unique. That's the biggest takeaway from this whole segment, is that every situation is unique. There is not a one size fits all solution to what you think that you're trying to do when it comes to renting versus buying. Depends on where you are in your journey, how old you are. I know one thing is for sure. I'm 41 years old right now. I cannot imagine paying a 30-year mortgage on a home until I'm 71. I can't. Based off of what I see life being, I just can't imagine paying a 30-year mortgage for a home until I'm 71. That sounds crazy to me. It just sounds crazy. And I'm talking about a personal home that I live in. I can't even imagine living in the same place for 30 years. That's just not my lifestyle. It's not my lifestyle at all. So I got a different lifestyle. I got a different objective. I got a different thing that I'm trying to solve for. I'm in a different space in my life. And so I align my interests and my purchasing and my investment strategies based off of where I see myself in the next 10 years. So that's how I kind of look at it.